I should start by setting the scene a bit. My name is Pierre, and I live in a relatively affluent suburb outside of Denver. The neighborhood is one of those planned communities with an HOA that's supposed to maintain uniformity and preserve property values. I bought my house about 8 years ago after getting married to my wife, Sarah. It's a nice four-bedroom place on a pretty big lot. But the thing that really sold us on the property was this absolutely magnificent tree that takes up a huge part of the backyard. I'm talking about a massive old oak tree that the previous owner claimed was over 300 years old. This gnarled beast towered over 70 feet tall, with branches spreading out in every direction, providing lovely shade over most of the yard. Now, just to be clear, I'm not some raving eco-warrior or anything, but I've always loved nature and had a deep appreciation for this ancient oak that miraculously survived suburban development. The thought of cutting down a living thing that had witnessed so much history just felt sacrilegious to me. I made sure to have an arborist inspect it annually, and they always gave it a clean bill of health, even saying it could easily live another couple of centuries with proper care. So I took great pride in being a good steward of this tree, meticulously pruning it every spring and giving it plenty of water and fertilizer. It rewarded me by staying lush and mighty in the heart of my yard. My neighbors loved to admire it from the street, and home buyers were stunned by its magnificence looming over the backyard. I can't tell you how many people knocked on my door over the years asking about its history and if it was the oldest tree in the neighborhood. Well, unfortunately, not everyone appreciated this natural wonder. Enter Karen, the HOA president, and a miserable old shrew who seemed to delight in making others miserable with her endless nitpicking. She was one of those self-important types who loved to wield whatever little authority she could muster to bully others into strict conformity. I first got on her bad side a few years back when I refused to remove some weeds and overgrowth from my garden that she deemed unsightly. The reality was, it consisted of native flowering plants that helped support local bee populations, something I felt good about as an environmental compromise for living in a neighborhood carved out of former marshlands. Karen did not care about such nuances, though. She issued me a violation notice, demanding I remove the weeds or face fines. I responded by quoting passages from our community guidelines that said nothing about prohibiting wildflowers and vegetable gardens. After going back and forth, exchanging increasingly nasty letters for a few months, where I basically told her to get stuffed, she eventually gave up. But she never forgave me for the utter disrespect of defying her pious authority. So, when it came time for my yearly pruning of the grand oak a couple of years later, I could see the look of absolute revulsion on Karen's face anytime she walked past my house and saw workers tending to what she called that hideous tree. I could practically read the bitter thoughts bubbling in her mind about how such an unsightly thing did not belong in her neighborhood. Given our history, I never dreamed that she would go as far as trying to destroy the tree. But that is exactly what ended up happening. It was a picture-perfect fall day when I returned home from work to find a shocking scene. A professional tree-cutting crew from the township going to town on my prized oak with chainsaws and chippers. I ran outside, screaming and waving my arms like a madman, demanding that they stop. Stop, you idiots! What the hell are you doing? The crew chief sauntered over, clearly annoyed at the disturbance, and in a gruff southern drawl he said, "We're removing this hazardous tree by order of your HOA, ma'am." Ma'am, this redneck tree murderer was about to get an earful. Like hell you are. This is my damn tree on my private property. You get off my land before I call the cops. At this point, Karen stormed over, wearing one of her signature gaudy, jewel-encrusted sweaters, looking like a pig decorated for slaughter. "I ordered them here as HOA president because that tree is a safety hazard," she declared. "BS, Karen. You just think it's ugly, and this is completely illegal, you miserable shrew," I shouted back. The crew chief tried to calm things down, saying that they had been hired by the town at the HOA's request after an arborist hired by Karen deemed the tree hazardous. He showed me the official order to remove it. "That is just a damn lie. I just had it inspected last month, and it was perfectly healthy. Where's your town arborist's credentials? You're just a hack looking to make a quick buck." Karen was livid at this point. "How dare you accuse me of dishonesty? I'm looking out for everyone's safety here, she yelled, getting nose to nose with me. Safety, my ass, Karen. We both know you've had it out for this tree forever because it doesn't fit your dystopian vision of suburban blandness. This time, you've gone too far, though, I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. Realizing that he wasn't going to be able to finish the job without things getting even more heated and potentially litigious, the crew chief ordered his guys to pack up and prepare to leave. Of course, Karen had a conniption, ranting about insubordination and threatening that the township would be hearing about this. Hands shaking, she jabbed her crooked finger toward me, rage burning in her eyes. You just wait, Pierre. I have a sworn affidavit from a certified arborist that this tree is deceased and a safety hazard to the entire neighborhood. I'm holding you personally responsible for any damage it causes when it inevitably falls. I'll make damn sure you're bankrupted by the liability. Seething, I responded with what I still consider some of my finer zingers. You have a certified arborist's opinion from who? The damn philanderous divorce dating service. You're nothing but a spiteful busybody, Karen. That last bit, of course, referred to her messy divorce years ago after her husband was caught cheating on her for who knows how long with multiple women from the local massage parlor. A real classy guy, by all accounts. Anyway, my wife had come home sometime during all the chaos and saw this unhinged shrew berating me in our front yard. Needless to say, Sarah was mortified by the whole scene and desperately tried to defuse things before further escalation. Please, Karen, calm down, she pleaded. Look, we'll get the tree re-inspected ourselves if you have any concerns, but there's really no need for anything rash here. Let's just take a deep breath and sort this out. Karen shrieked. You two arrogant punks always think you're above the rules. Well, you're going to get yours. Just you wait. And with that, she stormed off in a huff, her pearls practically rattling off her neck. The next morning, I started making phone calls to every arborist in the area, arranging for a full inspection along with quotes for ongoing pruning and care. Sarah and I knew this could get expensive, but we both felt strongly that caring for this mighty oak was worth it. Sure enough, every arborist who saw the tree glowed with amazement at its remarkable health and hardiness for being so ancient. The consensus was that, with regular upkeep and pruning, it could easily stand for many more decades without posing any safety hazards whatsoever. We eagerly shared these inspection reports with the HOA board, thinking the clear professional opinions would end this petty vendetta against my tree. How naive we were. About 3 weeks later, the storm that Karen had been brewing finally made landfall. We had visited my grandparents' place for a couple of days, and as soon as we arrived back home, we heard a tremendous crashing sound outside. I threw open the curtains to see Karen's pristine pearl-white Mercedes convertible completely demolished by my fallen oak tree. I ran outside in a panic, half expecting to find Karen crushed underneath the trunk, but thankfully she wasn't there. The image of her prized luxury car, though, looked like a scene straight out of one of those overly dramatic car insurance commercials. The massive tree had toppled directly onto the Mercedes, obliterating it into a gnarled mess of shredded metal, shattered glass, and crumpled leather. Branches and leaves jutted out from the flattened body in twisted heaps. As I got closer, I could see the oak's mighty trunk had pierced straight through the engine block, reducing what was once German automotive excellence into a grisly, grotesque corpse. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt over the immense property damage this would cause Karen and her family, but the more vindictive, petty side of me admitted taking a bit of perverse pleasure and satisfaction in seeing her smug obsession with material wealth, literally crushed by the forces of nature she tried so hard to contain. Then again, I wouldn't argue that nature is too much to blame here, since Karen's tree-cutting crew from earlier had inflicted massive damage on my tree and apparently made it weak and fragile. That, combined with the awful weather and bad storm that day, equaled a really bad time for Karen. A fuming Karen arrived on the scene, her face redder than a nuclear reactor's warning lights. She took one look at the mangled wreckage and towered under the ancient oak, and her eyeballs looked ready to explode from their sockets like overstressed rivets. Peer, she bellowed with a raspy, demonic fury that sent nearby birds fleeing for their lives. You son of a gun, you did this on purpose. I calmly tried to explain how ridiculous her accusation was. Karen, I had nothing to do with this freak act of nature. And by the way, I was gone for a couple of days. This wouldn't have happened without your stupid tree-cutting crew. She stomped right up into my face, spraying flecks of spittle with each rageful breath. Don't give me that crap, you pathological liar. This is arborist malpractice. I knew that deceased monstrosity was a hazard, which is why I tried having it removed. Based on what evidence? I fired back. Every independent expert said the tree was healthy and stable. You just hired some quack with fake credentials to justify getting rid of it because you think it's ugly. That's a lie. Her voice cracked under the immense strain. I had a certified professional examine it, and they agreed it needed to come down before causing catastrophic damage, which is exactly what's happened here. She pointed a bony finger squarely at my nose. I'm suing you and your homeowners, insurance into bankruptcy over this, Pier. We'll see who's ugly and deceased when you're living in a cardboard box under an overpass. With that fragrant parting shot, Karen pivoted on her reinforced orthopedic housewife pumps and stormed off to apparently formulate her legal Armageddon, or have a coronary episode, whichever came first, I guess. Over the next several days, things only escalated further. We got a letter from Karen's lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been plucked straight out of a late-night infomercial for ambulance chasers, citing something called tree keeper liability law, and demanding I pay for the full value of her Mercedes SL63 AMG Roadster, plus substantial punitive damages for gross negligence that put her safety at severe risk. The total amount they were seeking was a cosmically stupid $183,000, all for a 6-year-old car. From what I could tell based on some frantic Googling, their legal reasoning was fairly spurious, but the prospect of having to go to war with Karen and her likely expensive legal team still rattled me. We were fortunate, though, that our insurance company took the matter seriously. They contracted their own independent arborists and expert witnesses to officially document the state of the tree. They also scrutinized Karen's so-called certified arborist and quickly determined that he was neither licensed nor qualified to make professional assessments on tree hazards or residential landscapes in our state. Their background check revealed that this arborist was a fired municipal worker from a neighboring county who now ran a cheesy side hustle business where he dressed up like an old-timey groundskeeper and did silly gardening routines for elementary school tour. In other words, Karen had solicited a total charlatan arborist who rubber-stamped her personal vendetta against my tree in order to justify having it illegally removed. When she couldn't succeed through official HOA channels due to lack of proper justification, she simply fabricated it through underhanded means. Armed with all this evidence poking gaping holes in Karen's bogus case, our insurance company advised we let her move forward with the lawsuit. They promised to provide a fully legal defense at their own cost and were highly confident that they could not only get her frivolous claims dismissed, but actually go after her for filing such a spurious action in the first place. I have to admit, I was initially pretty nervous about the prospect of getting sued, even if we were clearly in the right. The thought of having to spend untold time and money on legal proceedings was giving me anxiety. But our insurance rep repeatedly assured me this was an open and shut case of malicious prosecution that they would squash like, well, a tree falling on an overpriced German convertible. So we allowed Karen's lawsuit to move forward, confident that the truth would prevail. Over the next several months, the legal wrangling and paperwork exchanges were heated, to say the least. Karen's slimy lawyer frantically tried arguing that the inspections we provided were worthless because they happened after the tree fell and called our arborists easily duped hole diggers. He went so far as to accuse our insurance company of doctoring evidence by superimposing a tree trunk onto clearly photoshopped pictures of Karen's mangled Mercedes. I'm not kidding. The guy was pulling out every dirtbag lawyer tactic imaginable to somehow pin the blame for that tree's trajectory on us despite a total lack of evidence. Finally, when it became clear that we weren't just going to roll over, Karen's lawyer threatened to depose every resident in our neighborhood to dig up any possible dirt he could find to portray us as negligent scofflaws who flaunted HOA rules on the regular and turned a blind eye to residential dangers. In retrospect, this turned out to be perhaps the biggest gift Karen could have given us. Our insurer's legal team practically did cartwheels down the hall when the other side announced their intention to start deposing neighbors. They then immediately filed a motion for Karen herself to give sworn testimony, along with records detailing every HOA dealing and judgment over her multi-year presidency. You see, by going down this road of portraying us as smug rule breakers through the lens of HOA violations, Karen had opened up a massive can of worms that revealed a pattern of petty abuse of power on her part that would ultimately doom her case. During her deposition, a flustered and sweaty Karen stumbled through hours of questioning about HOA policies and procedures regarding tree maintenance and removal. Our attorney grilled her over exactly whose arborist assessment gave them cause to deem my ancient oak a safety hazard worthy of removal, and of course, questioned the legality of hiring a tree-cutting crew to actually damage my ancient oak tree. She stammered about relying on the aforementioned certified arborist, whose background had already been thoroughly discredited. When pressed for documentation proving this arborist was properly accredited to assess trees on residential properties in our township, Karen finally cracked and blurted out that she had pursued the removal unilaterally as HOA president, based solely on her personal opinion that the tree was ugly and did not fit her view of how the neighborhood should look. This pivotal admission blew up in spectacular fashion. Our attorney pounced, describing her as a prejudiced despot with no legitimate authority to order the removal of private property over her subjective aesthetic whims. More importantly, they hammered her over the fact that not only had she provided false documentation to hire those tree cutters, but she had actually circumvented the HOA board entirely by fraudulently presenting it as a public safety matter when it was really just about her personal dislike for my tree. Karen's lawyer knew the deposition was a total disaster for their case, but flailed helplessly to put the genie back in the bottle. Other HOA board members and residents were grilled about Karen's history of overreaching her authority, corroborating a clear pattern of her trying to unilaterally dictate community policies based on her own biases under the guise of environmental protection and community values. These included things like trying to ban modern art installations in people's front yards to uphold oppressively banal community decor standards, preventing homeowners from installing solar panels or drought-resistant sustainable landscaping that did not conform to her ideal suburban aesthetic, and even ordering a neighborhood playground dismantled without cause right before it underwent much-needed safety renovations because she thought the kids' equipment was starting to look rundown and trashy. With all this damning testimony and evidence, it was becoming abundantly clear that Karen was completely unfit to wield any kind of authority over the neighborhood. She had abused her HOA presidency at every turn as a personal fiefdom to enforce her rigid and arbitrary ideas about how the community should look and function. Her vendetta against my tree was simply the most brazen example of her going rogue, with no proper oversight or procedural justification. The fact that she went so far as to fabricate sham arborist credentials and bypass the HOA board entirely made it an open and shut case of her wildly overstepping her authority. As the legal pressure mounted tremendously on Karen, her lawyers finally understood the writing was on the wall. They had walked right into a massive malicious prosecution trap of their own making, with zero legal footing left to stand on. Karen's team saw the impending financial calamity headed their way if they allowed this to proceed to an inevitable trial judgment. The punitive damages, tree replacement costs, and legal fees they would be on the hook for after having this case so thoroughly dismantled could bankrupt Karen and her entire household. So, in a move that still makes me smile, they finally waved the white flag and agreed to a stunning settlement that accomplished far more than just making my family financially whole again. First, Karen had to pony up a lot of money that she was trying to extort from me to cover the full value of her Mercedes and my legal fees. That was just the start, though. She was also ordered to pay $170,000 in compensatory damages for the appraised value of my centuries-old historic oak tree that was destroyed due to her malicious actions. On top of the staggering $353,000 payout, Karen faced further financial and authority kneecapping in order to avoid having a nuclear verdict rendered against her that could purge her entire net worth over this HOA malfeasance. She and her lawyers agreed to a brokered resignation from her post as HOA president, effective immediately. This wasn't just a standard term-limited resignation, either. She had to sign a full legal dissolution, severing her from having any HOA oversight role or voting rights in community matters for a period of no less than 20 years. Karen ended up putting her house up for sale and left the neighborhood within 12 months as part of the settlement terms. She could never again own property in our community and was legally barred from even setting foot on HOA grounds except for completing the sale of her home. The final icing on the cake was that she had to submit a formal public apology letter to every resident, detailing her systematic abuses of power and acknowledging her multitude of judgmental overreaches that undermined property rights and resident autonomy. This letter also had to include language forbidding her from ever suing or seeking legal retribution against anyone in our neighborhood relating to the current legal actions. So basically, in one fell swoop, this miserable bully of a woman was effectively exiled from our community in utter disgrace after being stuck with over $350,000 in financial penalties. And yeah, guys, with this, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed the HOA story. And if you're new to Story Slices, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we'll be posting daily content here. However, just to warn you, I won't read every single video. We'll have a multitude of readers, but every now and then I'll definitely voice a video if you want. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like on the video, and I'd very much appreciate it if you could post a pizza slice emoji in the comments because that would help us tremendously. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.